Okay, we're going to check over day 1 questions, and then we're going to move into day 2. So, as you are finding these on YouTube, the first 2 were titled like Miss Kim Team Talk Day 1 Part 1, Miss Kim Team Talk Day 1 Part 2. And if you found this one, you know it's Team Talk Day 2 Part 1. So just going to kind of do them that way this week, and so that we can kind of keep up with it a little easier, maybe a little different, but a little easy. All right, so we want to keep in mind what our end in mind is, identifying those qualities of the main character. Stanley is our main character. By analyzing his thoughts, his words, and his feelings. So not a lot really going on with Stanley right now. When we get to our questions here in just a moment, we will be identifying one of those qualities in just a second that kind of show us a little bit about who Stanley is. So our vocabulary is recycle, and that is to use again. And I think that when I was reading yesterday, I really thought about how he's recycling his clothes every day. He's not getting new clothes or fresh clothes every single day. He's having to wear his work clothes 3 days in a row, on that, or 2 days in a row, and on the third day, his recreational clothes turn into his work clothes. So he's recycling those recreation clothes at that point. We have increasingly, that means more and more. We are increasingly becoming better at this distance learning. So we are becoming more and more at ease with it. Collapse is to fall down. Retrieved is fetched. So if someone asks you to retrieve something, you go and get it. And then you would say, well, I retrieved this for you, to show that past tense that it was done. Humiliating is embarrassing. My mother always had a way, and still does, of embarrassing me. And to the point where it's not cute. It's just like you just want to sink in the floor. Humiliating. Despicable is terrible. We have staggered is walked unsteadily. And survive is where you are staying alive, where something is going on in your life and you're just trying to survive it, trying to stay alive during this moment in time. Now, I want us to take out your team talk and really pay attention about making those corrections, guys, because those of you that did get the test done in a timely manner, one of the things I did notice is that some of those team talk questions that repeated, you didn't get full points on. And it's because you didn't go back and make the corrections as we went over them. So, number 1, how is Stanley similar to the other men in his family? Well, I'm just going to be honest. There's quite a few ways that you could say that he's similar. The most common answer that I know I'm going to get here is that they're similar because they all have the same name. And if you go to page 9, at the top of the page, it says Stanley's father was also named Stanley Yelnats. Stanley's father's full name was Stanley Yelnats III. Our Stanley is Stanley Yelnats IV. So that tells me that for 4 generations of men in the Yelnats family, that every father has named the firstborn son after himself. So they all have the same name. Now, the other way that really stands out to me how they are the same is on that 3rd paragraph on page 9. All of them had something else in common. So it asks us in the question, how are they similar? And so having something in common is the same thing as being similar. And it says, despite their awful luck, they always remained hopeful. So I chose to say that they had awful luck. Okay? You might have chosen that they remained hopeful. Either one of those I would take because there's textual evidence to support either one. Okay. Question 2 says, I got to flip my page. Sorry, guys. What is the setting of our story? What is the setting? And I'm flipping to chapter 4, page 11. You could have said that your setting is Camp Green Lake. You could have said your setting is the desert. You could have said your setting is in the desert in Texas because that's where the state is in. Any of those would work. But then it wanted you to say, what is it like? So what is the setting like? And then if you look at the last paragraph on page 11, it says, the land was barren and desolate. There were a few rundown buildings. There were only 2 trees, and that was the only plant life that he could see. So you would have had to pull out all of that to support what it was like there, okay? So page 11, last paragraph is where you would find that. So make sure that you are making those corrections, guys. Let me be quiet so you can do that. All right, so now we want to look at question 3. What does Stanley have to do every day at the camp? Now, a vast majority of you have seen this movie, so you know what he has to do without looking into the book. But on page 13, the last paragraph, it says you are to dig 1 hole each day, including Saturdays and Sundays. So your correct response there would have been D. And which says he has to dig a 5-foot deep hole in the hard ground. If it had asked you to explain where your answer came from, then you could have given that evidence on page 13. Number 4, this is our end of mind question. This is where we are identifying that quality. It says, what is a quality of Stanley's character that you identified from today's reading? Use your detail from the story to support your answer. I chose that I feel that Stanley is an obedient kid, okay? And obedient means that you do what you think you're supposed to do. You do what you're asked to do. And that's what Stanley's showing me on page 13. When Mr. Sir says, whenever you speak to me, you must call me by my name. Is that clear? And Stanley hesitated. Yes, Mr. Sir. So he's obedient by, even though he goes on to say he couldn't imagine that that was really his name, he still says, okay, yes, Mr. Sir. And then throughout page 13 and 14, and even 15, you could have listed other pieces of evidence that supported him saying, yes, Mr. Sir, no, Mr. Sir. That he's being obedient and remembering to call him that as he goes through. So that's what we were looking for. Fix it if you need to or add to it. Now, I want you to think about, is Camp Green Lake what Stanley originally expected? No. He thought he was actually going to a real camp, like he had envisioned rich kids going to, that had a lake, that there might be activities to do, and boy, was he in for a shock. When he gets there, it's like a work camp. And probably the worst possible kind of work camp. It's hot, it's dirty, it sounds like it has horrible like living conditions, just from what little bit we've read thus far. So it's not at all what he was expecting. So we want to open our book up to page 16, chapter 5. Okay, keeping in mind that we are identifying qualities of our main character. Stanley is our main character by analyzing there. So I'm assuming we're analyzing just his thoughts, words, and feelings. I'm trying to fix this video to where I can see it and you can see all my head. Woohoo! See my head. All right, chapter 5. There were 6 large gray tents, and each one had a black letter on it, A, B, C, D, E, or F. Now, the first 5 tents were for the campers. The counselors slept in F. Stanley was assigned to D tent. Mr. Pendanski was his counselor. My name is easy to remember, said Mr. Pendanski as he shook hands with Stanley just outside the tent. 3 easy words, pen, dance, and key. Well, Mr. Sir returned to the office, and Mr. Pendanski was younger than Mr. Sir and not nearly as scary looking. But the top of his head was shaved so close it was almost bald, but his face was covered in a thick curly black beard, and his nose was badly sunburned. Mr. Sir isn't really so bad, said Mr. Pendanski. He's just been in a bad mood ever since he quit smoking. The person you got to worry about is the warden. There's really only one rule at Camp Green Lake. Don't upset the warden. Well, Stanley nodded as if he understood. I want you to know, Stanley, that I respect you, Mr. Pendanski said. I understand that you've made some bad mistakes in your life. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here. But everyone makes mistakes. You may have done some bad things, but that doesn't mean you're a bad kid. Stanley nodded. It seemed pointless to try and tell his counselor that he was innocent. He figured that everyone probably said that, and he didn't want Mr. Pendanski to think he had a bad attitude. I'm going to help you turn your life around, said his counselor, but you're going to have to help me. Can I count on your help? Yes, sir, Stanley said. Mr. Pendanski said, good, and patted Stanley on the back. The 2 boys, each carrying a shovel, were coming across the compound, and Mr. Pendanski called to them, Rex, Alan, I want you to come say hello to Stanley. He's the newest member of our team. Well, the boys glanced wearily at Stanley. They were dripping with sweat, and their faces were so dirty that it took Stanley a moment to notice that one kid was white and the other was black. What happened to Barf Bag? Asked the black kid. Lewis is still in the hospital, said Mr. Pendanski. He won't be returning. He told the boys to come shake Stanley's hand and introduce themselves like gentlemen. Hi, the white kid grunted. That's Alan, said Mr. Pendanski. My name's not Alan, the boy said. It's Squid, and that's X-Ray. Hey, said X-Ray, and he smiled and shook Stanley's hand. He wore glasses, but they were so dirty that Stanley wondered how he could see out of them. And Mr. Pendanski told Alan to go to the rec hall and bring the other boys to meet Stanley. Then he led him into the tent. There were 7 cots, each one less than 2 feet from the one next to it. Which one was Lewis's cot? Mr. Pendanski asked. A Barf Bag, he slept over there, said X-Ray, kicking at one of the beds. All right, Stanley, that'll be yours, said Mr. Pendanski. And Stanley looked at the cot and nodded. He wasn't particularly thrilled about sleeping in the same cot that had been used by somebody named Barf Bag. I kind of get that. Barf Bag or barf is another way of saying throw up, so it kind of brings to mind not a good image of someplace I want to sleep. Well, 7 crates were stacked in 2 piles at one side of the tent. The open end of the crates faced outward, and Stanley put his backpack, his change of clothes and towel in what used to be Barf Bag's crate. It was at the bottom of the stack that had 3 in it, and Squid returned with 4 other boys. The first three were introduced by Mr. Pedanski as Jose, Theodore, and Ricky. They call themselves Magnet, Armpit, and Zigzag. They all have nicknames, explained Mr. Pedanski. However, I prefer to use the names their parents gave them, the names that society will recognize them by when they return to become useful and hardworking members of society. Now, in class, this is where I would ask you with your A and B partners, I'd like you to identify a quality of Stanley's character through his interaction with Mr. Pedanski. But since we don't have a shoulder partner, I'd just like you to think about that. With just Stanley and Mr. Pedanski, what would be a quality of Stanley? The quality that I think of is that Stanley is cooperative. And my evidence would be on page 17. I think it's 17. Yes, where Mr. Pedanski is asking Stanley to help Stanley turn his life around. He says, "Will you help me with that?" And Stanley says yes. He doesn't say, "I don't need my life turned around. I'm innocent." He's just trying to fly under the radar, and he's just like, "Yes, sir, I'll help you with that." So he's being cooperative at this moment. Make sense? All right, let's keep reading. Top of 19. "Well, it ain't just a nickname," X-Ray told Mr. Pedanski, and he tapped the rim of his glasses. "I can see inside you, Mom. You've got a big fat heart." Well, the last boy either didn't have a real name or else he didn't have a nickname. Both Mr. Pedanski and X-Ray called him Zero. "You know why his name's Zero?" asked Mr. Pedanski. "Because there's nothing inside his head." And he smiled and playfully shook Zero's shoulder. And Zero said nothing. "And that's Mom," a boy said. And Mr. Pedanski smiled at him. "If it makes you feel better to call me Mom, Theodore, go ahead and call me Mom." And he turned to Stanley. "If you have questions, Theodore will help you. You got that, Theodore? I'm depending on you." Well, Theodore spit a thin line of saliva between his teeth, causing some of the other boys to complain about the need to keep their home sanitary. "You were all new here once," said Mr. Pedanski, "and you all know what it feels like. I'm counting on every one of you to help Stanley." And Stanley looked at the ground. And Mr. Pedanski left the tent, and soon the other boys began to file out as well, taking their towels and change of clothes with them. And Stanley was relieved to be left alone, but he was so thirsty he felt as if he would die if he didn't get something to drink soon. "Hey, Theodore," he said, going after him, "do you know where I can fill my canteen?" Theodore whirled and grabbed Stanley by his collar. "My name's not Theodore," he said. "It's Armpit." And he threw Stanley to the ground. Well, Stanley stared up at him, terrified. "There's a water spigot on the wall of the shower stall." "Thanks, Armpit," said Stanley. And as he watched the boy turn and walk away, he couldn't for the life of him figure out why anyone would want to be called Armpit. In a way, it made him feel a little better about having to sleep in a cot that had been used by somebody named Barfbag. Maybe it was a term of respect. Chapter 6. Stanley took a shower, if you could call it that, ate dinner, if you could call it that, and went to bed, if you could call a smelly and scratchy cot a bed. Because of the scarcity of water, each camper was only allowed a 4-minute shower. Well, it took Stanley nearly that long to get used to the cold water. There was no knob for hot water, and he kept stepping into, then jumping back from, the spray until the water shut off automatically. He never managed to use his bar soap, which was just as well because he wouldn't have had time to rinse off the suds. Dinner was some kind of stewed meat and vegetables. The meat was brown, and the vegetables had once been green. Everything tasted pretty much the same, and he ate it all and used his slice of white bread to mop up the juice. Stanley had never been one to leave food on his plate, no matter how it tasted. "What'd you do?" one of the campers asked him. Well, at first, Stanley didn't know what he meant. "They sent you here for a reason." "Oh," he realized, "I stole a pair of sneakers." The other boys thought it was funny. And Stanley wasn't sure why. Maybe because their crimes were a lot worse than stealing shoes. "From the store, or were they on someone's feet?" asked Squid. Neither," Stanley answered. "They belonged to Clyde Livingston." Nobody believed him. "Sweet feet?" said X-Ray. "Yeah, right." "No way," said Squid. Well, now as Stanley lay on his cot, he thought it was kind of funny in a way. Nobody had believed him when he said he was innocent. Now, when he said he stole them, nobody believed him either. Clyde "Sweet Feet" Livingston was a famous baseball player. Well, he led the American League in stolen bases over the last 3 years. He was also the only player in history to ever hit 4 triples in one game. Stanley had a poster of him hanging on the wall of his bedroom. He used to have the poster anyway. He didn't know where it was now. It had been taken by the police and was used as evidence of his guilt in the courtroom. But Clyde Livingston also came to court in spite of everything. When Stanley found out that Sweet Feet was going to be there, he was actually excited about the prospect of meeting his hero. Clyde Livingston testified that they were his sneakers and that he had donated them to help raise money for the homeless shelter. He said he couldn't imagine what kind of horrible person would steal from homeless children. That was the worst part for Stanley. His hero thought he was a no-good, dirty, rotten thief. And as Stanley tried to turn over on his cot, he was afraid it was going to collapse under all his weight. He barely fit in it. And when he finally managed to roll over on his stomach, the smell was so bad that he had to turn over again and try sleeping on his back. The cot smelled like sour milk. Though it was night, the air was still very warm. Armpit was snoring 2 cots away. Now, I'm going to read the team talk questions, and I want you to break them down. I think we'll get through them a little quicker that way. What crime is Stanley found guilty of committing? You're going to choose one of the multiple choice. Number 2, why does X-Ray want the smaller shovel? And number 3, why does Stanley have a hard time digging on his first day? Why is it so hard? And number 4 is our end in mind question. So we know that's going to be one of our Google Classroom questions. We really want to be thinking about this particular skill question. What is a quality of Stanley's character that you identified from today's reading? And today's reading is going to be pages 23 through 28, okay? So I want you to write that down, right beside question 4. Draw an arrow or whatever you need to do, okay? Pages 23 through 28. And then they want you to use details, and that's going to be that textual evidence that support your answer. All right. Here we go. Page 23, where I stopped, middle of the page. Well, back at school, a bully named Derek Dunn used to torment Stanley. The teachers never took Stanley's complaints seriously because Derek was much smaller than Stanley. Some teachers even seemed to find it amusing that a little kid like Derek could pick on someone as big as Stanley. Well, on the day Stanley was arrested, Derek had taken Stanley's notebook and, after a long game of come and get it, finally dropped it in the toilet in the boys' restroom. By the time Stanley retrieved it, he had missed his bus and had to walk home. It was while he was walking home, carrying his wet notebook, with the prospect of having to copy the ruined pages, that the sneakers fell from the sky. "Well, I was walking home and the sneakers fell from the sky," he told the judge. "One hit me on the head. It had hurt, too." Well, they hadn't exactly fallen from the sky. He had just walked out from under a freeway overpass when the shoe hit him on the head. And Stanley took it as some kind of sign. His father had been trying to figure out a way to recycle old sneakers. Recycle, he's going to try to, can you use them again, these old sneakers? And suddenly a pair of sneakers fell on top of him, seemingly out of nowhere, like a gift from God. Well, naturally, he had no way of knowing that they belonged to Clyde Livingston. In fact, the shoes were anything but sweet. Whoever had worn them had had a bad case of foot odor. Well, Stanley couldn't help but think that there was something special about the shoes, that they would somehow provide the key to his father's invention. It was too much of a coincidence to be a mere accident, and Stanley had felt like he was holding Destiny's shoes. He ran, thinking back now. He wasn't sure why he ran. Maybe he was in a hurry to bring the shoes to his father, or maybe he was trying to run away from his miserable and humiliating day at school. And a patrol car pulled alongside him. A policeman asked him why he was running. Then he took the shoes and made a call on the radio. And shortly thereafter, Stanley was arrested. It turned out that the sneakers that had been stolen from a display at the homeless shelter. Well, that evening, rich people were going to come to the shelter and pay $100 to eat the food that the poor people ate every day for free. Well, Clyde Livingston, who had once lived at the shelter when he was younger, was going to speak and sign autographs. His shoes would be auctioned. And, excuse me, Eli, come shut the back door, please. Just a moment. And all the money would go to help the homeless. Well, because of the baseball schedule, Stanley's trial was delayed several months. His parents couldn't afford a lawyer. "You don't need a lawyer," his mother had said. "Just tell the truth." Well, Stanley told the truth, but perhaps it would have been better if he had lied a little. He never could have said he found the shoes in the street. No one believed that they fell from the sky. It wasn't destiny, he realized. It was his no-good, dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. Well, the judge called Stanley's crime despicable. The shoes were valued at over $5,000. It was money that would provide food and shelter for the homeless. And you stole that from them just so you could have a souvenir? The judge said that there was an opening at Camp Green Lake, and he suggested that the discipline of the camp might improve Stanley's character. It was either that or jail, and Stanley's parents asked if they could have some time to find out more about Camp Green Lake, but the judge advised him to make a quick decision. Vacancies don't last long at Camp Green Lake. Take a moment and see where you can write down your pages from where your evidence has come from. So I'm going to give you about 30 to 45 seconds. All right, we just have a couple more pages to go. Well, the shovel felt heavy in Stanley's soft, fleshy hands. He tried to jam it into the earth, but the blade banged against the ground and bounced off without making a dent. The vibrations ran up the shaft of the shovel and into Stanley's wrist, making his bones rattle. It was still dark. The only light came from the moon and the stars. More stars than Stanley had ever seen before. It seemed he had only just gotten to sleep when Mr. Pedanski came in and woke everyone up. Using all his might, he brought the shovel back down into the dry lake bed. The force stung his hands but made no impression on the earth. He wondered if he had a defective shovel, and he glanced at Zero, about 15 feet away, who scooped out a shovel full of dirt and dumped it on a pile that was almost a foot tall. For breakfast, they had been served some kind of lukewarm cereal. The best part was the orange juice. They each got a pint carton. The cereal actually didn't taste too bad, but it had smelled just like his cot. And they filled their canteens and got their shovels and were marching out across the lake. Each group was assigned a different area. The shovels were kept in a shed near the showers, and they all looked the same to Stanley, although X-Ray had his own special shovel, which no one else was allowed to use. X-Ray claimed it was shorter than the others, but if it was only by a fraction of an inch. The shovels were 5 feet long from the tip of the steel blade to the end of the wooden shaft. Stanley's hole would have to be as deep as a shovel, and he'd have to be able to lay the shovel flat across the bottom in any direction. That was why X-Ray wanted the shortest shovel. Well, the lake was so full of holes and mounds that it reminded Stanley of pictures he had seen of the moon. "If you find anything interesting or unusual," Mr. Pedanski had told him, "you should report it either to me or Mr. Sir when we come around with the water truck. If the warden likes what you found, you'll get the rest of the day off." "What are we supposed to be looking for?" Stanley asked him. "Well, you're not looking for anything. You're digging to build character. It's just if you find anything, the warden would like to know about it." And he glanced helplessly at his shovel. It wasn't defective. He was defective. See what you can figure out for evidence real quick. And then I'm going to have you do a couple of questions today, and we'll finish the reading tomorrow and finish the questions as well. Let's just go ahead and go to the top of 28 because we just have a half a page left. It's kind of silly not to finish it. Well, he noticed a thin crack in the ground, and he placed the point of a shovel on top of it, then jumped on the back of the blade with both feet. Well, the shovel sank a few inches into the packed earth, and he smiled. For once in his life, it paid to be overweight. And he leaned on the shaft and pried up his first shovelful of dirt and then dumped it off to the side. "Only 10 million more to go," he thought, and then placed the shovel back in the crack and jumped on it again. He unearthed several shovelfuls of dirt in this manner before it occurred to him that he was dumping his dirt within the perimeter of his hole. Well, he laid his shovel flat on the ground and marked where the edge of his hole would be. 5 feet was awfully wide. And he moved the dirt he'd already dug up out past his mark. He took a drink from his canteen. 5 feet would be awfully deep, too. Well, the digging got easier after a while, and the ground was hardest at the surface where the sun had baked a crust about 8 inches deep. Beneath that, the earth was looser. But by the time Stanley broke past the crust, a blister had formed in the middle of his right thumb, and it hurt to hold the shovel. All right, so this is where I'm stopping today. Make sure that you go back and that you are writing down where your evidence is going to be to support your answers that we are going to be looking at tomorrow. So that being said, once you've got all of your evidence kind of done, go ahead and feel free to close it up for today. Or if you want to get started on your questions, 1 through 4 are going in your journal. It's totally up to you. Tomorrow's assignment is going to be do 1 through 4 in your journal, and then I'm going to assign you which 2 to upload into Google Classroom. All right, guys, enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.